Hello, everyone, and welcome to Gemini Rising. I'm Ann Wolke, and I'm here with Natalie Sady, my fabulous co host. And today we are here to talk about spiritual, or is it mystical, places that we've resonated with. So, what do you think? Are we talking about spiritual or mystical places?
Well, I think we need to. Well, first of all, I just want to say our intro today hilarious, and it sums up the day we've both been having with you and I just randomly, popping up. So here's the thing: when we were coming together and putting this show together, we said, right, let's do this because we obviously are always talking about different places you and I want to travel to, and you kept saying mystical, I kept saying spiritual, and there was this debate as to what the words mean to each of us. So the way I've put this together is I think there is a mystical quality to all of these places, but for me, I go there and they feel spiritual for me. And when I say spiritual, I think of it in terms of I feel a deeper connection than what I feel in most places. I feel home, I feel connected to something greater, whether that just be Mother Nature in a really special way, whether that be to the universe, or whether that be to my ancestry in terms of not the ancestry I know of, but the ancestry in terms of past lives. So that for me is how I've approached this, but I want to know how you've approached it. And in your mind, every time I was saying spiritual and you're saying, but mystical, like what was your definition in all of that?
Well, I think what happened is that I've been conditioned probably to think of spiritual as some sort of organized church environment, right? And and I don't know why. Or else I think of spiritual as sort of a state of being. And maybe I feel spiritual all the time. But
Maybe.
you know, to me, a place that is mystical, if I'm thinking of places that have resonated with me, that put me in the frame of mind of everything you just talked about, there's always a mystical element to it. So, in my list of places that I want to talk about today, I think there's a little bit of mystical and spiritual. So, I don't know. To you, what's mystical to you?
So when I think of mystical, I do think for me they come under the same category. I think it's really just choosing different words and choosing the definition that it means for us. And I giggled as I was getting ready and thinking about this because I knew we were going to sort of define this before we got into these places that really resonate with us. And at a time where society as a whole is redefining so many words, I chuckled because I went, this really is down to definition and what it means to each of us. And I think for me, I think of mystical more as a witchy thing, which I don't think, which isn't a bad thing. I love everything witchy because I think of witchiness as a wonderful thing to have and be a part of, because I don't think witch equals evil. So I think for me, mystical, I think of that. Like I think more of a witch and a cauldron and her crystal ball, which is ridiculous when I think about it, because
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that that's necessarily correct, but that's the image that word conjures up for me.
Okay. So, so then to maybe mystical places would be separate than a spiritual place. If it's a witch with a cauldron for you, that's not spiritual. For you, I think spiritual seems like a state for you, right? Or
Yeah.
okay.
I think it's that connection. And when people sort of say, when you're having a conversation with someone when you first meet them and they ask, are you religious? Are you spiritual? And I say, I'm religious, I'm not spiritual. And I always make a joke of it because it's such an LA thing to say, I'm very spiritual.
Right.
and I'm very connected. And I think for a lot of people, it's a saying and there's no truth behind it. Whereas I actually have a spiritual practice, which I don't expect anybody else to follow or do in the same way. For me, organized religion doesn't work and hasn't ever worked and hasn't resonated. So so Truth of Fears is in the chat and saying, when I hear mystical, I think of wizard and all things mysterious. I think that's where I was trying to go, but I understand through our conversations when you were saying mystical and I'm saying spiritual, I do think we were talking about the same thing. We were just using different words to get there.
Right. I think it's, in any case, we are going to look at places that have put us into a different state of mind, right? That take us into a timeless place, probably. And I do think we're probably talking about spiritual places. And for me, a spiritual place needs to be a little mystical.
Yes.
I think. And they're not all mystical. I don't know. It'll be curious. I'm curious to see how people will find our choices.
Well, and at the end, because I have an honourable mention and then I also have a dishonourable mention, which I know will fire people up because I know people are very divided about that particular place. But this is the whole thing, right? What works for me and what works for you is different to what works for, some of our audience. And this is the whole thing about, I think, Gemini rising as a whole. It's about being able to come together despite our differences and share the information that we have and hear what other people are saying and why they feel that way and move on.
Yeah. And I feel like we need to mention as well that it's Gemini season this time. So I think it's the first Gemini rising episode that we're doing during Gemini season. So that might be why we had a little ADD going and getting on task today. I don't know, but here we are. And why I couldn't choose a color for the background.
But the color looks amazing.
I think it still makes me a little ghoulish.
And it picks up on your beautiful eyes. I keep telling you, you look gorgeous.
Well, thank you, Natalie. And of course, you look gorgeous as well.
Thank you so much. Hi. All right. So should we just dive into this?
Sure. Let's just dive in. How do we want to do this? Are you going to say a few things about your place before I do the reveal?
Well, maybe I will. And then as I say the name, you can bring it up. I really struggled with this list. So I ended up, because I had a couple that were at the top that I knew I was going to put on this list. And then I went, oh, but which one's more? And then as we debated the whole mystical spiritual thing, I then, my list was changing and I was trying to sort of narrow it down. And this place I keep being drawn back to, and I was there recently, but there to me there is something incredible about this place, and every time I go there it physically takes my breath away, and that is Sedona. I think the natural rock formations that are there, I think the way, look at that. The way that feeds my soul is incredible. And when I was driving my family around, so I first went there with Dad, and that was last year, and Dad was like, this is incredible. And, he would sort of look at me and go, take a photo. And that was me being instructed to take a photo of him so he could send it home and say, this is what I'm doing. But when I was driving, and we had my sister and my stepmom with us on this latest trip, and I feel like it's an easier place to buy crystals, just because I feel like the people that are there are so in tune with the vibration that resonates with me. Whereas sometimes you go to places and you want to buy a crystal or you want to buy something that is more spiritual, and you walk in and just go, nope, this isn't my place. The energy that I'm getting off all of these things isn't really special. But I would be driving in, because I'm checking my mirrors and all of that, I would say to them, just turn around and look behind you, because the sun would be setting over those rocks. So for me, there is an actual vibration there. With my sister, we went out hiking in a few different places, and it was just one of the most special things, or one of the most special places I think that I've gone to. And anytime somebody says, "Oh, you just went, but I really want to go to Sedona," I'm like, "Yep, I'll go back." So that for me is probably number 5. Have you been there before?
So I know I've been to Sedona when I was really little, and I don't remember much. So not as an adult, no. And I really would like to go.
So I've been to a few places in Arizona. The other place that I really liked, I didn't like the town or the city so much, so I'm sorry if anybody's watching and they live there, Tucson. So I went for the Gem and Mineral Show, but it's the same thing. The mountains there is something so special about it. And you'll notice later on, when we get to my number 1 pick, that there's something about red earth that resonates with me in a really, really deep way. And I drove into Tucson with Bumble in February or March of 2020. We went to the Gem and Mineral Show, and I had a similar sort of reaction driving in and going, "Oh, this is so special." And my last day in Tucson, Bumble and I just went out to go hiking, to be amongst those mountains. So there is something about those Arizona mountains and rock formations that are so incredibly special to me.
Yeah, I have been to Tucson, especially the area I think that's just to the north, which is Oro Valley, and it's amazing. The landscape there is so beautiful, and it really just feels energetically alive as well. And I love the desert anyway, which you'll see in a minute. But Sedona is one of those places, though, that everyone who's spiritual talks about Sedona. And so you think it definitely lives up to the reputation and the hype.
For me, it did. And this is the whole thing, right? You go into places and you hope, especially when people talk about it in such a incredible way, that it will live up to everything that they've said. And because there's nothing worse, it's like with movies, when people go, "This is the greatest movie," and you go in to see it and you have these high expectations and it's kind of a letdown.
Right.
I do think there's something really special about Sedona. I think the energy there is incredible. I don't know that I would want to live there, because you know how people go to places and they go, "I could live here." I don't know that it's I could live there, but it is a place that I would be happy to go back to on a very regular basis. I feel filled up and fulfilled when I leave there. There is a magic in the energy there for me.
And there's supposed to be an energy vortex there, right?
Yeah, so we didn't go out specifically to any of the vortex areas. We just sort of went and really connected with earth in any way that we can. And the nights were still quite cold while we were there, but even going to dinner, it was really hard to get a reservation. And we ended up getting an inn at Mariposa, which is this beautiful restaurant. Some friends put us in contact with somebody there. And so we ended up eating there, I think 3 or 4 nights in a row. And they kept saying to us, "We're so sorry, like we're at capacity. We're going to have to seat you outside." And even though it was cold, we were so happy to sit outside and watch the sunset go down over those rock formations. I mean, I'm not someone that copes well with being cold, but to me that speaks volumes about how I feel about a particular place. If I'm happy to just sit there in amongst all of it while I'm cold, and at times had my hood on through dinner just to be able to be there. So while not going to any of the spots that have the vortexes specifically, to me, you get that energy just from being in the area.
I think there's something magical and mystical just about deserts, right?
I agree.
And I guess it is spiritual, because deserts play an important part in a lot of religious stories, and especially if you think about the stories of the Old Testament and New Testament, especially, and the story of Christ, right? And going out into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights when you need to go internal and do spiritual work. Put someone in the desert because it's a matter of survival there. And there are extremes that get you to think about the black and white of life, right? The opposite extremes. You're talking about, having your jacket and bundling up for your dinner, and maybe in the middle of the day, you're dying out in the heat, right? So I just feel like there's not another place on earth. A desert in general is just, there's so many lessons. And when you look at the creatures that can survive there, they're so weird, right?
Well, and I will say, you're absolutely right about the creatures. And not only that, if you watch any sort of documentaries about life in the desert, even the flora that blooms after the rains come and all of that, it is a whole other world. It's almost as different as when you go diving in the ocean and you go deep diving and find, not the coral reefs, but these animals that live at depths that the water pressure and is incredible and the sunlight doesn't get to, and these creatures find a way to survive. And I know some people go, oh, look at this horrible looking creature. And I see beauty in all of it. But the other thing I will say, I said at the beginning of this, I'm not a religious person. Organized religion has never worked for me. And it's not that I haven't searched for one that would work. It just hasn't. The Chapel of the Holy Cross in Sedona has to be one of the most special churches I've ever been to. And this is the church that was built in amongst the rock formations. If I had have been better at organizing before we did the show and we pulled all these photos, I would have tried to find some of the family photos of us out and about doing these different things. But we went in there and there was someone, unfortunately, that fell from not the hike my sister and I were doing, but the hike that was across the way from where we were. And we got there, they were doing the body recovery, all of that, which was just horrible. But we spoke to some of the witnesses that were there and sort of comforted them where we could, because they witnessed or heard it and were there for the aftermath of it. And there were some really special things that happened while all of that was going on. One of the women who was holding this woman's child while the husband was comforting the husband who just witnessed his wife falling to her death, apparently a ginormous butterfly came and sort of landed right in front of them. And the woman who was holding the child said, I took that as a sign that her soul was free and she was okay. And that's what she was letting us know. So the next day was when my family and I went to the Chapel of the Holy Cross, and Dad and I had been there before. My stepmother and my sister hadn't. And we got up there and I decided to light a candle for this woman. And I just wanted her to know that she would never be forgotten. That day had such a profound impact on me when I was there. And I don't think that's ever something that you forget. And so we did that. My stepmother, when we came out of the church, because we didn't speak while we were in church, and we were all sitting separately. We just sort of wandered in when we were ready and we walked out when we were ready. And my stepmother came out and said, I felt arms around me while I was in this church. And then my sister was incredibly emotional while we were in the church. And she was reading, and the woman that designed the church, she designed it for all denominations, for everybody to be able to come and get what they need from that place. And so I think that was one of the most special churches I've ever stepped foot in.
Yeah, that's such just an unbelievable story. I know you told me about it as it was happening as well, and I just could not believe that. That's really awful.
And I thought you would appreciate that I mentioned a church. Or that I found a church amazing. It's a joke between Anne and I. It's nothing.
And that you went in and you lit a candle and you knew to do that.
Yeah.
It's very impressive, Natalie.
Thank you so much. Apart from my obsession with the hymns.
Did you? Oh, yes. Maybe we'll talk about our favorite hymns at some point.
I only have one.
Well,
Maybe I can sing it for everyone.
maybe at the end we can have you sing it.
I don't think anybody wants that. Okay, so what is your number 5 pick?
Okay, so on the theme of deserts, oops, I just removed it. No, there it is. My number 5 is the place where I grew up, which is the Mojave Desert. And I know when people see Joshua trees now, everybody thinks about
Yes.
Joshua Tree, right? The national park, and it's an amazing place, and I love it. But I also just grew up in the Mojave Desert, and I really didn't appreciate it while I was growing up, I think, because it is a place. You're getting in there your favorite hymn.
They were asking, I had to tell them.
I was trying to keep everybody
Oh,
with
I'm
their
so
suspense
sorry.
at the end.
It's a surprise. Don't read the comment.
Anyway, but maybe at the end she'll sing it so we all know what it is. But anyway, growing up in the desert, I did not appreciate it because I grew up in a place that's 50, 60 miles northeast of Los Angeles. And it was an extremely small community while I was growing up. And then since then, it has grown crazily and has all sorts of people there. But the desert, is still there. It's impossible to build over all of the desert. Everybody who I've met that is not from the desert, when they get there, they think, oh, what is this brown place, this just like ugly place, this flat place. People don't automatically appreciate the beauty of the desert. And so to me, I think that is extremely spiritual, to find the beauty in the desert. And it's got, like I said, there are such extremes. In the Mojave Desert, you can have days that are 110, 115 degrees. But then in the wintertime, you can have snow. And no, it's not just climate change. It's been like that because of the elevation. And it's amazing that every season in the desert is different. And when you grow up there, you see all of the subtle differences. There's nothing like the desert after the rain. There is nothing like that smell. I've never been anywhere that is like that after the rain, or that feels like it. The night skies in if you go to places in the desert that are dark enough, they are amazing and brilliant skies. I remember I went to a community college for my first 2 years of college, and we had an astronomy class that took us out into the desert, into an observatory, this little tiny tin observatory that we got to go in and take timed photos of a star that we had to calculate, and we had to learn to follow it with the telescope as we were taking the picture. And I had never seen so many stars before as that night, when we were really out and you could actually see the Milky Way and so many stars and planets. So that's beautiful. And even the sunrise, which is not necessarily my favorite time because I don't like to wake up that early if I haven't been awake all night. But when I was in high school, my boyfriend's father had a hot air balloon. And so I used to get to go out on the weekends and be there. You had to get there before dawn because the wind comes up in the desert as well, right? So you'd get there in the dawn or before dawn, all the balloons that were out there would inflate. And then as the sun came up, the balloons were up and going up. And there's nothing like that, being in the desert, seeing the dawn and seeing these hot air balloons. So those are all things that I remember fondly from the desert. The creatures, my favorite's the roadrunner. And
I didn't know they were real birds until I moved over here.
Right.
And everyone thought I was crazy when I went, they're real? Because one appeared on set. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. And they're fast.
They are. There's fewer and fewer because because they're doing so much building, and it's really rare to see roadrunners anymore, or family of desert quail. Those are rare. And we used to always see tortoises growing up. You'd see, it wouldn't be like they'd just be roaming around, but there'd be tortoises, and people would have them in their backyards and feed them and have them there for years. And it's really rare now to see tortoises as well. So yeah, roadrunners are real. I should have put a picture up of a roadrunner.
You should have. So I was at a shoot and we were standing there and I was waiting to be told action. And there was this bird and I've gone, hey. And they went, oh, that's a roadrunner. I went, they're real? And they looked at me and I said, I'm from Australia. I just thought they were made up fictitious birds. And they went, no, they're real. And I went, oh, let me go get my phone. I've got to send a photo to my dad. And I went to get my camera and then this thing runs off and I went, it's so fast. And they went, did you ever watch the cartoon? I said, I didn't know it was real life. And then obviously once I had Bumble and I started learning about how wily the coyotes are, the cartoon made so much more sense. But you don't think about this if you don't grow up with these animals around you. And I did take my dad when 2022, I took him to Palm Springs for the first time. So one of the days I said, let's go out to Joshua Tree. And we did that. And my dad's name is Josh. So I have video of him telling me I have to take a photo of him and his tree because it's his namesake, Joshua Tree. And we just had such a great time out there. It was just, it really is special. But one of my favorite things, and this is going to sound so stupid, but I'm going to share it. So a girlfriend of mine got some really, we were basically given some accommodation out in the Mojave Desert. And so we get out there and it looked like a really cute Airbnb. And you know, when you get to some of these Airbnbs, you're like, it's just not quite as nice as what the pictures say. And it wasn't that clean. So there was an indoor shower, which it was really difficult. I think it was either freezing cold or scorching hot. And it wasn't the cleanest shower. Like you really didn't want to be in there. They had an outdoor shower. So where we were, there was nothing around us at all. We were convinced it was either going to be the most magical trip or we were going to get murdered. But so we started showering outdoors in the outdoor shower. And can I say, showering outdoors in the middle of the Mojave Desert is pretty freaking special. You're out there with nothing but desert. Well, I strongly recommend it.
Well, we've got a lot of neighbors around my dad's house. There's a lot of
maybe not there,
but so I'll have to find a place where I won't offend anyone's vision.
I do think showering outdoors, there's something, I've done it on a few trips, just where you go to places and they have these outdoor showers that are very private. There is something beautiful about being in that water and being outdoors at the same time.
Wasting water in the middle of the desert.
You need to be clean, Anne.
You do. And I mean, there's so much, growing up, like I said, I remember days where I'd have to go out for some sort of an event where you, like the Indian maidens, which we'd never have now, like you had to go out for a parade and march in the parade, right? Oh, I hated it because you'd be out in the dirt and getting dirty. You have to get up early, all those things that I then later came to appreciate. But it is not always easy. And then in the spring, it's just like wind out of control. So now that I don't live there anymore, I can visit at my favorite times and have an amazing time. Plus, the other thing is that around the times of meteor showers, it's amazing to be able to go out and you just look in the direction and you actually see all the meteors. Here, I don't know how many times where I live now that I go outside to see something and, oh, yeah, it's overcast again. So,
yeah. And even the place I go in Malibu to do all my stargazing, some days I get out there and it's clear, but you see the marine layer coming in and just as you're watching, it just starts closing up until in the end you're looking through at that much clear sky and the rest of it is marine layer, at which point I give up and drive back down the mountain. But I've driven out to the desert just to go stargazing.
Yeah. And also, I don't know about this, but David talked about going out there with Jimmy Church and seeing UFOs and all of that, or UAPs. Is that what they are now? Anyway.
I still call them UFOs. I don't move that quickly with all the terminology.
Yeah. And I was never abducted as a child. I was never abducted by an alien, so guess they didn't think I was interesting enough.
Well, I was watching something with Dolores Cannon last night, and there's a clip of her saying that not everyone that sees a UFO is abducted, but often we lose mere seconds. But in those seconds, they're downloading information that we're going to need as the Earth shifts, and we'll have the necessary information for us to survive and make the shift. And we won't know where it's come from, but it comes from these encounters that we may not even remember. And I found that really interesting. Time will tell whether that's correct, but
yes, I love all of her stuff on aliens and such.
Well,
I don't remember what's the name of the book where she talks to the people who have been abducted, where she does regression on them, and I don't remember which book.
So my sister's read all of her books. I actually haven't read any. I've got about 4 of them. So I've just finished a book. So I think one of hers is going to be the next ones, or one of the next ones. Okay. So my number 4 pick, again, another place that I was at recently, but I think this place is so magical, is Yellowstone National Park. I mean,
it's amazing.
I don't even think words are needed. And I was so tempted to pull out some of my photos from the trip. And when we were there, only about a third to maybe half of the park was open. But the colors of the landscape, and you get areas like this, then you have areas. So you've got the Grand Canyon within Yellowstone, which is different to the Grand Canyon that we all know. And then you've got the animals that are there, and you've got the bears and the antelope and the elk and the bison and all of that. I mean, we were lucky enough to see a mama bear and her cub while we were there. We didn't get to see any of the wolves, which I was so disappointed about. We did drive to a spot where there is a den, but we spoke to people that had been out with their camera equipment and said they couldn't see anything. But there is something about this place that is, and maybe this is nuts, maybe this is me making this up, I don't know. But I feel like when you're in a spot that is so naturally diverse and magical in terms of just to look at it, there has to be a bigger energy there. There just has to be. And that may be crazy, but that's how I feel. I think I included a couple of extra photos.
Okay, next. Oh, that's
and this is the whole thing. We would see them, and we would just sort of go, okay, and you'd go down little service roads and stuff. And we did get video footage from when we were in traffic. And, we would have to stop because the bison would just be blocking the road. And they're so funny. They're just like, it's our place. You can just wait. And videos of them sort of walking up the road, and you hear the clip clop of their hooves on the road. And it disturbs me that there are so many moronic people that try and get close enough to pat them, all of that. Because I just sort of think, whenever I see videos of bison goring somebody, I'm on the side of the bison. I'm like, if you're stupid enough to think that you can go up and pat them, they do look so docile, and they're non-aggressive unless, and there are signs everywhere saying don't block their path, don't make them feel boxed in, don't approach them. And they tell you for which animals how far the distance is that you need to give them. And people are so stupid, they just don't. And there weren't many people at the park when we were there, but there would be people screaming at these tourists that are sort of running after the bison, going, get back. You're going to be killed. So to be that close to all of those animals, there was a gray coyote, which looks different to the coyotes that I encountered frequently when I would go walking with Bumble. It was more of The ones around here look almost like German Shepherds in their coloring. The one that we saw while we were there, it looked more, the color's almost similar to what a grey wolf has. It's that sort of lighter coat with the black tips, obviously to blend in with the natural scenery that they're moving through. But for me, animals feed my soul. So to be around all of them, and we saw the longhorn goats and what have you. And then if you want to go to the last photo that I pulled up, which is the Grand Canyon, I don't think that actually is the Grand Canyon. It's part of it. But again, it just
Or Yellowstone, right?
Sorry?
It's Yellowstone, right? Not the Grand Canyon.
No, correct. But they have there were people within the park that were working there that were saying you've got to go see the Grand Canyon. And I've looked at him and gone, we're not near the Grand Canyon. He goes, no, the Grand Canyon within Yellowstone. So that's what they were calling it. So that's just what I'm calling it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's similar to the Grand Canyon that we know, but it's different again. And so as you move through the park, there are these just completely different vistas that you get to witness and see, and these incredible waterfalls and these canyons. And one of the bridges that you drive over, they have a history about how this bridge was built. And initially it was so rickety and they sort of kept using it, and then they eventually replaced it. And now we have the road, which is sturdy, that we drive on today as we're going through the park. But to me, there was just an energy to this entire place. And I would love to go back and be able to see the rest of the park when it's not covered in snow and you can move through it a whole lot more. But when you travel with family, it's a lot. There are, whenever you're traveling with anyone, being around each other all the time, you run out of things to talk about and people get crabby, and it's a lot. Our family was so chill through this whole thing, and I can only put it down to the energy of where we were.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody got mad. Nobody got anything. It was a really beautiful and special experience.
I remember when I was a kid, we went to Yellowstone, and while I was there, I was so sick. I got strep throat, and I think I was like in second grade or something. So I have the weirdest memories of Yellowstone. On one hand, I remember how bad I felt, and on the other hand, I just remember it being so magical. That's the only word. And to stand there and wait for the geyser for Old Faithful, that's where it is, right?
Yeah. And did you know that Old Faithful used to go off every hour, but every time they have an earthquake, and they're often having earthquakes within the park, it throws Old Faithful off by a few more seconds. And it's happened with a few of the other geysers in the park. So every time there's an earthquake, they go off by another, 5 seconds or 9 seconds. And so now Old Faithful, which used to go off every hour on the hour, he goes off every 90 minutes.
19 or 90?
90 and
okay.
N0 90. So
yeah,
there is this shift that happens naturally with all these different elements of the park.
And when you were there just, I think I remember you talking about this on Full Disclosure. Did you talk about it on High Vibe TV for anyone who isn't a subscriber?
And
but weren't you talking about the numbers of people there or not?
Yeah. So so we spoke to some locals, and they were saying, because we said, when's the best time to come? And they said, listen, now, last week of April is the best time to come. Problem is, a lot of the park is closed, but you don't have the crowds. And so when we were in different areas, and when a place is swarming with tourists and you can't get somewhere, and then you've got the influencer trying to take their photo and just being rude and obnoxious,
being rammed by the bison,
right? And we were there, and so if we saw groups try, one person from the group not being in the photo, we would walk up and say, hey, can we take your photo? And they go, oh, thank you so much. And at which point, people around us, because the groups were so small, everyone would kind of step out of the photo. And so we were able to take really great photos for people. And then we would say, can you take our photo? They'd say yes. And it became this very community like feeling, and everybody was sort of moving. So everybody had their moment and were able to capture these photos without inconveniencing anyone or anything like that. The traffic jams were minimal. And now let me say, you're never mad when it's a bison holding you up or a coyote running down the road. You're really happy to let them do their thing because it's just such a wonderful experience. We asked someone about what happens during peak times, and they said, oh, you don't want to be here then. Traffic is out of control. The obnoxious tourists are around. It's hard to park your car and see things. Also the bears, because as it gets too hot, they go higher up to the higher altitude so that they're not as affected by the heat. So you won't see them. You'll see a lot more elk, whereas the elk were hard to find for us, but less animals at that moment in time. So they said the other good time is to come, I think, end of September or beginning of October. The problem with both times that they suggested is weather can be hit and miss because you get the snowfall, which can close roads. But I would like to go back and see the rest of it. I don't know if it would be possible to see the parts that I haven't seen if I was to go back in October, but that's probably what I would try before attempting to go at peak season, only because I don't like crowds. I just get really uncomfortable. I get energetically overwhelmed.
Yeah, I don't love crowds either, but I know when we went, I remember, I have a memory of being in a line of cars, wait and going really slow. But what I remember more than that is we did see elk. I remember, we have a picture, of course, of me and my brother standing, in front of the elk. So my parents were like, go get next to the elk, We luckily made it out alive, but we weren't that close. The thing I was going to say is even when there are crowds in places like that, I think most of the time, what I find amazing is exactly like what you were describing, where everyone was taking each other's photos, right, and making space for each other. I don't think that happens exactly like that when there's a whole bunch of people and you can't move, but there's always a real sense of the fact that everyone is having a communal experience. I love being in those sorts of places that take you out of the whatever it is, your moment, right? And it does transport you into everybody being connected to the same experience that's happening. And it's a good experience because you can be connected by a traumatic experience as well. But
absolutely,
something like going to a beautiful national park or a preserved area and seeing all of those animals and all of that beauty and the crazy geysers, it really is, unique. That's a spiritual experience.
And I will say the other thing that made it so special was not only helping each other out with photos and things like that, but the sense of community in terms of sharing information. So we were driving along and I don't think we knew where we were going. We just we looked at the map and went, right, we'll go up to here and then we'll turn around and, and we hadn't seen elk up to that point, and that's what we were hoping to see. In the search for elk, we saw the longhorned sheep. I keep calling them bighorned. I keep forgetting what's the right terminology.
But they're the curvy
sheep.
horns?
Yeah, they're almost like mountain goats in a sense that they're up high. They're on these sheer cliff faces, all of that, and they've got these ginormous horns. And we're driving along and there are cars everywhere and there's people and they've got their binoculars, and we were not prepared with binoculars or appropriate camera equipment. And the frustrating thing about that is I have good cameras, not brilliant cameras, but I have good cameras. I could have taken better photos anyway. But we pull up and I just wound down my window because I'm the driver and I said, what are we looking at? And somebody said, there's a bear. And I went, shut the front door. And I dumped that car so quickly. I pulled off the road, obviously, but I dumped that car so quickly. I was waiting for my dad to yell at me and go, you can't park here. Man, I found a spot for this ginormous car. I dumped it. My sister and I ran, and we get there and then we're going, where's the bear? And somebody said, oh, it's up there and it's by the tree. And so I zoomed in on my phone and I took a photo and I actually captured it, but it just looks like a brown blob because it's an iPhone. And so I looked at a woman and I said, would you mind if I have a look through your binoculars? My sister goes, you can't do that. And I said, if she can say no, But if I don't ask, I'm not going to get to see the bear. She goes, of course she can. And then another man who I assumed was her husband, I later found out they did not know each other. He says, come up here. It's going to be easier to see. We go, okay. So we go up the hill and the woman comes with her binoculars and we're up there. And so we're looking and I see the bear. I say to my sister, you've got to have a look. And then this man had just a single binocular. I didn't know that they exist. So you just, yeah.
A telescope, right? Or
well, it wasn't a telescope
monocular.
though. It's a what?
A monocular.
Yeah. So whatever he had, it was a single sort of thing. And my dad obviously went, they've seen something. And he sat in the car for a while. And then my dad comes wandering up and I'm like, Dad, come up here. And so he comes up and the man is saying to my dad, he goes, take this. It'll be easier for you to see. And then he's explaining to my dad where it is. And it was just such a beautiful experience. So then he was telling us where to go to find elk. And it was because of him that we saw the longhorn sheep and the antelope and everything else. And we did eventually see a couple of elk. They were very far away, but we got to see them. And, you know, it was so special. So that whole thing and the community or sense of community that you have when you're there, I think it has to come down to the energy of the place, because that is not how humans normally are with each other these days. It's how we should be with each other, but it's not how we normally are.
Right. All right. So shall we move on to my number 4? So my number 4 is a place that I visited while I was in college, and I went with a friend on a tour of Europe, and we took kind of the most affordable tour we could afford that would go for the longest amount of time. And we decided that because we were going to a study abroad experience after that, so we had limited time and we didn't want to try to figure out how to backpack by ourselves, right? So we just took a tour, and the tour happened to be full of Australians. I think I've mentioned it to you before, Natalie.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time I met a whole herd of Australians. And then there were a few New Zealanders and South Africans. And that was an interesting experience too. And then a few Californians and a couple of Canadians. I don't know why I remember all of that. So already, I guess this tour of these people speeding down the roads of Europe on this giant, motor coach, it was quite an experience. And so it was overwhelming for me a lot of times. And, because you're around a lot of people who are there, maybe not to see all the sights, maybe more about, drinking and having fun. And that could be fun too. But my friend and I were often overwhelmed. And so one of our stops, we were so pleasantly surprised and overwhelmed with the beauty that I think that's part of why I think it was such an amazing experience and why it feels so spiritual to me, because that was the context of this craziness. But I think people will still find it that way, even if you visit. And that was in Switzerland. This is a mountain above Lucerne, where we toured the city, and then we got to stay at a hotel up at the top of this mountain. And I think the mountain is called Mount Titlis, which is funny.
I've been there, and it is Mount Titlis.
Is it?
Except I only went for a day trip. I didn't get to stay up there, which I would have loved to have done.
Did you take the cable car up like that?
Yeah, we must have. I think we got on a bus which got us to the cable car, and then we had to go up the cable car. What sort of year was this? I'm wondering if we were there around the same time.
It was in the 90s.
Oh, okay. I was there in 2002.
Yeah. So, no. I'm sorry. My mouth was whatever. Too much excitement. I had to have hydration. But the cable car going up, that was the big thing that everybody was so proud of and excited about. And I guess that cable car was built in 1962, but they were still excited about it. And I can't remember if you just walked around the whole car, you could see everything from all angles. But the most exciting thing to me, I don't know, it was sort of just not even knowing what to expect. We were in Lucerne. You know, you see the village or the city, and you walk around, and you see the Swiss landscape, and it's amazing and different. Yes, but when we got out into these mountains and looked around, and you get out away from the people, and we were going up this mountain, and I think we also, there's a train that goes up as well. We went up the mountain train as well. You go past, like, it was not in the winter time, so there were fields with cows. I don't know what type of cows, and they had the little bells on them, like the little cowbells, and they're walking along, and all you hear are birds and cowbells. It was just like, wow, we're in Heidi.
The fields are so luscious and green. And my husband and I, because when you were talking about the cable car, I had a memory that we have all these photos, and we had taken them with an actual camera with film in it because it wasn't digital at that point. And we were taking photos, and we're going, look, they're Swiss cows. So that was what we called them, Swiss cows, because they had the bell and they were in these luscious, luscious green fields.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it was really just both of us. My friend and I were from California, and I don't even think she'd been out of really the South Bay area where she grew up. She had hardly even traveled out of California. And so to go into this environment that was completely different, it really it gave me a sense of, okay, now I'm bringing in like stuff from later on, but at the time you're so overwhelmed by the beauty of a place that you kind of come to understand something, I think, about the nature of beauty. It's like it's so far above what you ever imagined before, right? And it reminds me of, later on I learned a concept, and I always thought back to the Swiss mountains, and learning about the Romantic era in the 19th century and the end of the Enlightenment. As they were moving into this time that was more about feeling and less about being rational. One of the things was to look for these sublime landscapes that were supposed to transport you into a completely altered state. And I thought of these Swiss mountains because it's that kind of rugged environment that's like a dream landscape. It really was like a dream. And when we stayed up there at nighttime on the top of that mountain, you could go out at night in the darkness. And my friend and I went out, and there weren't many people out because they were all partying inside. And you go out in the stillness with the snow and everything too. I love being in snowy environments because there's nothing like the stillness and quiet of a snowy landscape. So it was amazing.
I agree with you. So I'm not someone that enjoys being cold, but I enjoy being in a cold environment from time to time. But
Mhm.
there is something about the snow, because I hate wind. Wind gives me anxiety when it's super windy out. It affects my nervous system. And I've spoken to a whole bunch of different people about this, and they say it's the way we're genetically made up, and it does affect people differently, but it rattles me in such a way. And there is something that I find, as much as I dislike being cold, when I'm in a snowy place, it tends to be still. Like when we were at Yellowstone, there was snow on the ground, and I was throwing snowballs at people very unsuccessfully. It turns out my aim is not very good.
Mhm.
And one woman did walk past at one point and said, "You didn't grow up in snow, did you?" And I went, "No." And she goes, "You can tell." Whatever. But again, it was never windy, and it was raining and drizzling at some points, and none of it bothered us. We were happy
Mhm.
to be out there in the rain. We were happy to be out there in the snow because of that stillness.
Mhm.
How was the stargazing while you were up there?
I don't remember. It must have been
Mhm.
cloudy at night, I
Yeah.
think. So a missed opportunity, but the cow grazing or cow gazing was great, and cow grazing. The gazing at grazing cows was amazing.
Yeah, no, the cow gazing was really special. We've never talked about Mount Titlis before
No, we
privately,
haven't.
so I love that we've both been up there, because there's snow up there 24/7,
Mhm.
365.
Yeah. And
So
later on I went because I had a friend in graduate school who was Swiss, and we got to go and meet up with him and see some of these places again with him. And oh geez, what was I going to say about it? But and again, it was magical, but we got to do more sort of daily life things, like go to his uncle's farm and see cows up close. So clearly my love of Switzerland has a lot to do with the cows there as well. But it's just a unique place in general. I think the people are in a different frame of mind, and so much history happened there. So historically, I love that, but it's really unique. And I do envy anyone who lives in Switzerland.
I will say, before I move on and go to my number 3 pick, that I had, when I was making my list, I listed Paris, Amsterdam, Rome. So it's really funny. When I was in Europe, and I haven't been to Europe in 20 years, but Switzerland, if people say, where do you want to go? Where do you want to spend more time? I always say Switzerland, because we were only there for a few days and I loved it so much. I just thought Switzerland has all the best parts of Europe, the food and the culture and the landscape, but it's different. It felt different to me to Paris, Rome, and Amsterdam. And I wanted to put them on the list, but I was like, if I've got to come up with my top 5, I obviously decided on the 5 that I chose. But I feel like in those cities, it's impossible to walk through and not feel the history coming out of the cobblestones and out of the buildings. I feel like if you are someone who is tapped into energy, it's impossible to not feel that. I remember being 21 and calling my dad saying, I can feel the history. And I'm sure he thought I was crazy. But
no, he did not.
That's
I mean, but it's so true.
Crazy.
It's really true. But also, it's just there's something about the act of travel that is a spiritual experience, and a lot of travel is really awful, right? And very aggravating. And it's a lot about trying to meet timetables and get places on time and being awake at times you don't want to be and having to figure out ways to transport all of your stuff, right? But once you get places and can absorb it, there's nothing like it to just take you out of your normal way of life and to transport you somewhere else. That I can see why when the church used to set up pilgrimages, what you learn mostly is along the way, not always at the location, right? So
I will say, I believe with every fiber of my being that I've had a past life in Amsterdam. And I thought it the first time I went there when I was 21. I got there and I remember I would just walk around that city and I felt like I knew where I was. It felt like home. It felt like I was stepping into some of the fairy tale books that I had read growing up, because we had these beautiful picture books with all the old school fairy tales, which I'm sure now would be deemed, not politically correct enough. But there is something about some of those European cities, and I'm sure there are deeper connections for some of those cities over others, and I'm sure that other people would feel the same way about different cities to what I feel. But yeah, there is something about all of them, right, which I think, and those cities are all so old as well. So there's every chance that we have all had past lifetimes in those cities at some point.
Yeah.
When we're
I was just going to say, I forgot that when we were at the Conscious Life Expo, remember the woman who took the aura or the photos of the aura and then told us about our past lives? She told me I was a Swiss dressmaker.
And she told me that I was Dutch. And I'm just putting 2 and 2 together, that I was an artist in Holland.
That you have got to go to Delft. Did I ask you that before? This will be on our next episode. Will have to be places we need to go, places that I've been that you need to go, and you've been that I need to go. But Delft is amazing because it's the city that, and that should be on my list. I should have put Delft, but it's the city where Johannes Vermeer was, where he lived. And if you've ever watched the film or read the book, The Girl with the Pearl Earring, that's where it is set. And if you haven't seen it, you should see that and tell me what you think. But
Okay, I will put it on my
beautiful.
must-do list.
Mm-hmm.
So my number 3 spot on my list goes to the Grand Canyon, not the one within Yellowstone National Park, but the actual Grand Canyon. I had such an incredible experience when I went out there, and I've only been there the once. Some friends and we met up in Vegas. They had been to Burning Man. I'd been to a dance expo that was happening in Vegas, and we met up after both things were done. And so we were driving out together to go to the Grand Canyon. I thought I found a way that it was only going to take us 2 hours to get there. And so I did some research. So I'm like, oh, we can leave a bit later. Nobody wanted to get up first thing in the morning. Turns out where we were going, it was taking 4.5 hours to get there. So it was what it was. And we were racing the sun by the time we got there because we were getting close to dusk. Anyway, as we're pulling into the Grand Canyon, all the tour buses are leaving, and we're like, this isn't a good sign. Anyway, we pay our entry fee, we go in. There's still some people because there's accommodation there that you can actually stay at. So a lot of those people, some people that were camping, and we wandered around. And so we got to watch sunset over the canyon. And it was one of those places that from the second I got there, it's that inhale that I can only describe where it's you feel something touching your soul at a deeper level. And so we watched the sunset. We took a whole bunch of photos and had a great time. We're walking along the rim, and then the sun sets and it gets really, really, really dark. And we're walking along, and I said to my friends, I can't see anything, and there's no safety rails, thank God. And I say that just because I would be horrified if they built safety walls along the rim of the canyon, because it would just destroy the beautiful scenery that is there. And I said, can we just sit for a minute and let our eyes adjust? And they said, absolutely. So we sit down, and it was summertime. So we were all in sort of like shorts and tank tops and things like that. And so I kicked my shoes off, and I was just grounding while we were sitting there quietly. And then my girlfriend looks at me and she said, are you grounding right now? And I went, how can you not amongst these rocks? And she goes, you're right. So next minute, her husband and her both have their shoes off, and we're all sitting there quietly just connecting to the energies of the Grand Canyon. And we ended up sitting there for probably about an hour and a half. And by that stage, our eyes had adjusted to the light that was there, and you could see the little fires within the canyon where people were down there and camping. And I just said to them, and I'll never forget it. I said, this is one of the most special places I have ever been. And every part of me wanted to stay. I wanted to go into the canyon. I wanted to be able to spend nights there and wake up there. The energy for me at this spot is so powerful and so all-consuming. I struggle to find the words to describe it. So we stayed there for a few hours, and then we headed back to where it was sort of the main touristy area where most people had been when we got there. And there were just a couple of guys standing there, and they were, I think, documentary filmmakers. And so we were talking to them. And then we all spent the next hour or two after running into them like this, because the stargazing out there is second only to the place where that comes number one on my list. But we stood there for hours just watching the constellations and talking about the sky and the stars and all the things. And that was just one of the most special days I think I have ever had on this earth.
Wow. Now, is this your picture?
No, this one's not mine.
Okay, I was going to say, that's amazing. You must have just jumped right out and taken the picture when you got there.
No, I didn't take that. I wish that I had of, but yeah. Have you ever been to the Grand Canyon?
Yeah, I have. When I was, I think a few times, when I was young, we went there, and we didn't get to spend a lot of time there. And then I went again on one of the trips that I've taken across the country. And every time I've always wanted to do that tour that goes down into the canyon. I always wanted to ride a horse into the Grand Canyon, like that you could do those tours.
Yeah.
That was when I was a kid. That was sort of like a dream. And then I found out I was allergic to horses, and I thought, well, that's never happening. But
Is
it's
it a
also
really bad
scary
allergy?
in
You
a
can't.
way. Well, it is. Like I've tried to conquer it, and
Okay.
it's I would have to take something heavy duty to be able
Okay.
to do that. But yeah, I always feel like I'm gonna fall in. Like you can go up and it's just amazing. Um, and also that's one of the really unique things about the country of the United States, just the landscape, right?
Yeah, it differs so much. I was going to say something. Oh, the Grand Canyon, like Yellowstone, no photo that any of us ever take will ever do it justice. These are the places on earth where you capture what you can, but it's never the full majesty of what it actually is. I don't think there's a way to capture what it really looks and feels like.
Yeah. It's a real gift for people to be able to do a landscape that captures. That's almost why paintings capture it more, right? Because you can infuse it with more of how it made you feel.
I
So,
agree.
so anything else on the Grand Canyon, or should we move
No,
on?
that's a quick one, but it is what it is, and I just think it's so incredibly special. But
So my next choice. So this is, are we on the third?
yeah,
Our third most spiritual, mystical places. I tried to choose a more traditional one that I still feel is a really unique spiritual location. And it's been in the news lately, and that's why I chose this location also, which is, drum roll, Wayfarer's Chapel. And have you ever been to Wayfarer's Chapel?
I've never even heard of this. I hear Wayfair and I think of the furniture store.
Well, it's not to do with the furniture store. Um, Wayfarer's Chapel. Now, I couldn't find photos. I have many photos that I've taken that probably could showcase a lot more of it. But but these are ones that I found on the internet. The one on the right is the first, I think it's like the first group of people who were worshiping there, even though the photos from the 1950s, I think. And so it shows you a little bit of where it's located. So this is on what's called Portuguese Bend at Palos Verdes Peninsula in California.
Oh, this is here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I, it's always been one of the most beautiful places. Marilyn Monroe was married here. And it's this glass chapel that's, all with all these glass panels, and then made out of this wood that I think is redwood. I forgot to look that up. And it was built in the 1940s, I believe, by a group of people who they purchased the land and started the project in the 1920s, that they wanted to build a church for the Swedenborgian church. Have you ever heard of the Swedenborgian church?
I have not.
So this is a church that was based on, I always want to say Edmund, what is it, Emmanuel Swedenborg's ideas. So this was a man from the 18th century who was an Enlightenment philosopher, mathematician, scientist, and he's one of these people he's a polymath, or was, who people say is one of the smartest men from that era. When he was, I think, 57, and I'm sure David could tell us why 57. There's probably an astrological reason for that. He gave up science. He had done so much scientific study that he started to go down that rabbit hole of trying to figure out, how do we locate the soul in the body? And he was convinced that the soul was located somewhere in the brain, and he had the particular region of the brain. And then he had been wanting to try to prove that, when he just kind of dropped that. And then he started to study the Bible and tried to figure out logically the how to apply the teachings of the Bible. And he saw the Bible as a kind of like a metaphor for people's spiritual awakening. So that if you go from Genesis in the beginning to Revelation at the end, it's a story of how we come into awareness of our own innate spirituality. So it's a really progressive sort of belief system where they really focused on the beauty of the natural world, and that there are many spiritual lessons to learn in the macrocosm of the world that you could then apply to the microcosm of yourself. So when they decided to build this chapel to that church by the 1920s, so it became a church, I think, in the 1780s and 90s. After he died, the people who had been interested in talking about his philosophy eventually formed a church. So this group of people commissioned Frank Lloyd Wright's son, named Lloyd Wright, creative name, right? And had him design this church, and then they built it. I think it was even designed maybe in the 30s, and then World War II happened, so that paused it, and then it was finally built. Well, if we fast forward to today, and also I guess I should say the design of it is made so that the outside of it, the outside comes within. So that's the whole philosophy of the church, right? That you should be able to be in touch with this beautiful landscape. And there are redwoods all around it as well, those trees. So it's a really, really beautiful place. And I know people have been on waiting lists. Like if you want to get married there, it's like a years long waiting list to do it. But now, why has it been in the news? Well, Portuguese Bend is also an area where there's an active landslide. And so now the landslide is hitting this land, and the church was starting to shift. And if you look up this area right now, if you look at the pictures, it looks like quite a bit of it has shifted. So they are actually going to dismantle the entire church and move it to a different location. So I don't know if it will last. And when I heard that, I was so sad, because it's really it's breathtakingly beautiful. It's a wonderful place to take photographs because of the landscape around it, and the trees are amazing. And I think I'm surprised neither of us put the redwood forest as one of our spiritual areas, right?
Oh, I did think about it.
Yeah. But I mean, the trees, I really believe there's something about redwood trees, even when they're not old growth, but those old growth trees are amazing. So it's this is the one space that I chose it was designed as a sacred space for this really cool, different religion. That's Christian, but still it's a completely different take on Christianity, with that focus on people embodying the energy of being Christ-like, I guess, right? So
Can people go in and just have a look?
yes, you can, but the whole time you're there. So I took my daughter to do her graduation photos here, and we did it all around it. But the whole time, I mean, there's wedding after wedding going through. It was just like a manufacturer of weddings, just one after the other. So you have to be able to time it and I think they have certain times you can go in and tour it,
Do you know which husband Marilyn married in there?
I don't know. Was it Arthur Miller? I'll look it up.
And I will say the redwood forest, because it was so close to making the top 5. I didn't love the town we stayed in when we were visiting the redwoods, but the actual redwoods themselves, I swear to God, when you're going through the forest, you can hear the fairies and the little people and their magic. And I know for some people, they'll be listening to this going, you are crazy. There is a magic in that forest that cannot be described. And I took so many photos, and I was trying to capture the beauty, and kind of like with the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone, you capture a certain amount of it, but you're not able to capture that feeling that you get when you're walking through. But there were just so many wows while we were making our way through.
And it's Joe DiMaggio that married that.
Okay.
Married there. So
How far is it from LA?
Well, from West LA, it's probably about 30 minutes.
Oh, so it's
It's
not
like
far.
you go to Torrance, if you've ever been to Torrance, and then head out towards the peninsula. And it takes a
Okay.
while because the speed limits are like 25 miles per hour through the neighborhoods. There's all these really nice old, wealthy neighborhoods out that way where they have horse trails, and it's a beautiful place to live if you could afford it. So anyway, an amazing location.
Oh, I have to go check that one out. So my number 2 is something that I have talked about on previous shows, but for me, it's Hawaii, and there is something for me, and I remember this from when I was little. That's how I envision myself in Hawaii. It's not it's not how it is, because I'm not great at surfing. I try, but the very last time I was on a surfboard, I managed to break a finger. But the air is different in Hawaii. And again, I feel like it's a call back to a past life. I am convinced I was an islander of some sort. Um, the Even when I was little, we had gone to Hawaii, I think at least once, maybe twice. But I remember even when I was little, I remembered how the air smelled. And it made me feel different. It made me feel connected. And swimming in the waters off the Hawaiian Islands, there is something, any ocean swim for me is cleansing, and I feel like a different human when I come out of that water. But in Hawaii, it's just different. Um, and then if you skip to the other slide, and I can never pronounce and I never remember the name, but the Botanic Gardens, this is a Botanic Gardens on Oahu. But again, this photo doesn't do it justice. These cliffs are just so tall, as if they're touching the heavens, and then you get the low cloud coming over them, and you get the rainbows that appear over the top of everything else. It is so special, and it does something to the very fiber of my being. And so every time I need a recharge or I need to reconnect, Hawaii is it for me. And I have gone to Hawaii on my own so many times, more times than I can count. And I'm trying to figure out if I can get back there at some point this year, just because I've missed it so very much. And when you were talking about tortoises in the desert, it made me think of a time. It was 2008. I was sort of done sitting by the pool, and I went and sat at the bar, and I was having a drink and just reading a book before I sort of took myself out to dinner. And I was sitting there and I was listening to the locals talk about all the efforts that had been put in to save the sea turtles, because they had been under attack for so many years. There weren't that many left. And we're sitting there and we're watching the surfers start to paddle in because the sun is setting, and the Hawaiian sunsets, the colors. I think there are certain areas in this world where sunsets are just so special, and you can look at a photo and know where those sunsets are from. LA is one of them. In summer, we get these incredible orange sunsets, and that come right after the golden hour. And in my number one place, those sunsets are something different again. But in Hawaii, you get these purple pinky sunsets that could only happen in Hawaii. So one of these purple pink sunsets is happening. The surfers are coming in, and this surfer's on his board and he's paddling in, and all of a sudden a sea turtle just pops its head up and is like, hi. And the surfer just stops, and the turtle just stops, and they're just looking at each other. We're all looking at them, looking at each other. And this was right as these people were having this conversation about the sea turtles. And so everybody just froze. And there was this incredible moment in time where everyone was just so respectful of this beautiful moment that was happening within nature. And then eventually the turtle sort of put his head back under and swam away. And you see the surfer just take a moment to take in what had just happened. And then he continued paddling in, and I just I was so grateful that I got to witness this moment. And for me, that is what Hawaii is. You've muted yourself.
I was so overcome by the story that I just had no words. But wow, amazing. Oh, I
Yeah.
love sea turtles. It
Have you
reminds me also of one of my honorable mentions, but I'll just say really fast was what I think it's called Wakulla Springs. I can't remember that place in Florida where I was in the wintertime and got to see manatees. So so much for me, I think, and for you as well, so much of how we experience the spiritual, I think, is through being able to witness wildlife in the natural environment, you know?
I think connecting to spirit, it comes through nature, and it comes through those connections that we're meant to have. And look, I'm not putting down this world that we live in that has so many conveniences and allows us to live very comfortably. But there is something about being in the natural world and the world that the universe created for us to exist in that I think deepens that connection or makes that connection so much easier to find versus the distractions of everything else. Have you been to Hawaii?
No, I haven't.
Oh,
No.
really?
Mm-hmm.
All right, we have to get you there.
Yes.
Go together. And I just want to say there are people talking about us doing location videos and mystical travel tours. We're working on it. Keep subscribing, keep sharing these videos, because there is going to be a moment where that will happen.
Yes. Was that the last Hawaii video? I mean, picture?
Yeah, I think it was just the two of them.
And are we on number 4 now?
Oh, well, so I'm counting backwards. So yeah, it's top 2.
Oh, like 2. So we're on number 2. That's what
yes.
I mean that too.
Just because I'm counting backwards. But yes, 4 for you, 2 for me.
No, it's 2 for me too. So Wayfarer's Chapel was number 3. Number 2 is, I'm with me, there's always going to be, there's something I find very spiritual in situations of loss, right? So spiritual moments and things for me are not always just ones that are breathtaking or, take you out of the now to this beautiful places. There's also just very profound spiritual and mystical experiences that where I've really been moved. And I think that, so obviously for me, being moved is spiritual, right? Especially when it moves you into an empathetic space of being able to feel the, certain realities that face humanity, and especially the types of things that we've done to each other throughout the 20th century, which was one of the most crazy and destructive centuries on record. So one of the places I found most moving is the Vietnam Memorial. And I just put up a screenshot from the website because you can go there, but I wanted to remember how many people's names are on this. So you've been to the Vietnam Memorial, haven't you?
Yes, and it was an incredible moment. My sister and I have incredible photos of my dad because he's a Vietnam vet. And we allowed him to just take the moment that he needed to be there. And so I have these photos of him sort of having his moment and remembering all the people that he fought with and that he lost. And there is a certain amount of trauma. And the security guard explained to my sister that the reason the stone is mirrored is so that when people are at the memorial, they can see what the Vietnam vets were fighting for or who they were fighting for.
And I have a feeling that that's just going to continue to be significant and meaningful for people for years to come, even as we're no longer the people that were affected by the fighting even,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because so much of the story of Vietnam is just the tragedy of the war that continued, and so many lives were lost, and so many people wondered, what was the point, right? And what did we actually fight for something that mattered? And yeah, just so many conflicting emotions, and so much about, for the United States, I guess from our perspective, it's also so much about what did it mean to be an American at a really difficult time in our history. So, and then there's so much of people being rejected who fought, and then, later on being accepted. But one of the most tragic things about Vietnam that I ever, that learning about it, or even just, I don't really remember anything about vets coming home or any of that, but I've always found it so tragic to hear about people coming home after having fought, and to just have people do the most horrible things to them. And I know, because people were standing up for other beliefs that they had as well. And that's what it means to be an American. But it's just a really tragic situation, and so conveyed. It's the best memorial that I've ever been to, I think, in that you start, and I couldn't find good images, so people will have to either go to the Vietnam Memorial, or you will have to see videos of it, because it starts with just this little small sliver, right? And you think, is that it? Or you could even walk up on it and see, like, where these backs of these heads are. There are some statues of soldiers, and then there's the statues of the nurses, the Vietnam nurses. And you could say, okay, that's not that effective. That's not very profound. Then you start to walk, and that wall just gets bigger and bigger, and you realize it's just name after name after name. And for, at this point in history as well, you do see people like the woman who's depicted there, who's taking an etching of somebody's name that she obviously knows, that you can do that as well. So you see those people, you see people experiencing and going through the memories of the war as well. That I don't know, there's just something amazing about being in the presence of that. It's sacred, it's moving, it's totally quiet as well, right? People are very respectful of allowing people to have whatever experience they're having. So yeah.
What I will say, when we were talking about doing this show, and I was thinking, we should have a dishonourable list as well, even if we just sort of touch on them briefly. So Washington, D.C. was going to be on my dishonourable list, because
What?
no, but here's the thing. The memorials they have within DC are so amazing and breathtaking and moving and emotional. And so my dad being at the Vietnam Memorial was so special. I think it's special for him in terms of healing and grieving and going through the human emotions that someone is left with after they've been through such a battle. And, the saying, I support the troops, I don't support the war, was a very common saying when we had soldiers in Afghanistan and off in all these foreign lands. And unless you've been there as a soldier, I don't think you have any concept of what it is these people, men and women, actually have to face, and the trauma that is associated with whatever it is that they go through. And my dad has told me certain things about Vietnam, and some of it we kind of put pieces together, and then other things, he won't talk about because it's too difficult. And he did go to a reunion recently, and I think that was really difficult, but I think that healing process is incredibly special. And I'm so sorry, and Americans, please don't hate me. What's the name of the memorial where they've got the statue of Abe Lincoln and he looks over?
The Lincoln Memorial.
There you go.
Yes.
Okay, so the Lincoln Memorial, and he looks over at Congress, and it's meant to be him, keeping an eye on everything. I got emotional at that memorial because even that is something moving. And I think for so long, people have held America in such high regard, and they're the epitome of freedom, and they're the gold standard of what a free life is meant to be. And so, seeing the Lincoln Memorial and reading why it was designed the way it was, I remember the whole time we were in DC, I was just saying, nobody does a memorial like America does. And all of the memorials were so wonderful in DC. And there is not one that I would say was terrible. And they're so thoughtfully designed. But the feel of the city is what I didn't like. So the city as a whole, when you're just moving through it, whereas the memorials, I think, sit differently.
Mm-hmm.
Just my opinion.
Yeah, it's an interesting place. And I've spent a couple of summers in Washington, D.C., and the humidity there is crazy on
Yes.
another level as well. But I was lucky enough to be able to have my kids with me, and we spent summers there where we got to do the fireworks on the National Mall and all of that. And it was amazing. But I also had friends that lived in the area, and I think it makes it a lot easier when you can stay in people's homes and you're not navigating the city by yourself or without knowing the city, because it's not the easiest place to be around. And there are so many amazing memorials. And I mean, really, honestly, I can remember night times being on the mall, on the National Mall with my kids, where I had gotten out of an archive because I was at the Folger Shakespeare Library, which is like right near the Capitol building. And then I would come out and meet them, and we'd go for a walk. And a lot of times we'd go walk past one of the memorials. And it was every single one, like with kids too, is such a great learning opportunity, because like the Korean Memorial, I don't know if you remember the Korean War Memorial, where every statue, where it's just haunting, first of all, because it's like they're walking through a field, and every statue is an individual. That's what I love the different thought that goes into each memorial. And I think the wonderful thing about the Vietnam Memorial, though, is it's the first one where it put the soldier and the nurse or whoever else, right, front and center. It's all about the people who fought and the people who mourn or who are coming to grips with it. That's why it's just an amazing memorial. And I think there was some controversy over it when the design was first accepted. And I can see where people would think, what? Like, just that's it. But it's just so powerful. It's an experience. So I hope it maintains that experience for people when all of us who are affected in some way by that war, when we're long gone, hopefully it will still have meaning for people.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm living forever.
Well, that's right. I mean, when we come back and we're watching the people who've come after us, when we're vampires, I don't know what we do, but, when we've got our stem cell experiments. Anyway, that's another show.
Okay, so my number one pick is where I would have moved to had my visa to come over here to the US not come in. This is my favorite part of Australia, and it's not the easiest to get to. In winter time in Australia, you can get direct flights from Melbourne or Sydney, but any other time, or if it's late in the season or early in the season, you've got to fly through Perth to get there. And that is Broome in Western Australia. It's in the northwest part of the country. This is where 80% of the world's pearls come from. And when they discovered that they were so rich in pearls, a lot of the Japanese came over to start diving. So there were all these Japanese pearl divers. I don't know a whole lot of the history, but I do know that a lot of them lost their lives. It was sort of dangerous work. But so there's a very strong Japanese influence over there in Broome. And So that makes it sort of different to the rest of Australia, and certainly on the East Coast. In summer, it's that sort of typhoon season. They can get cyclones and what have you there. Summer is summer. Winter is when you want to go. It's when the heat is dry and you've got these beautiful, 30-degree days. So I'll say 80, 85-degree days. It's not super humid. The weather's just perfect. The nights are balmy, and the sunsets there are like nowhere else on earth. The sun will set really quickly, and I don't think they do daylight savings over there. So the days sort of sunset isn't happening at 8:30 or 9 p.m. It's happening at sort of 6:30. But it's a special sunset when even the locals come down every night to watch the sunset. It's just so, so magical. And one of the things that I love about it, okay, so it's not just one thing, let's be honest. So you can see in some of these photos, the sky is blue, the water is turquoise, the sand is actually quite white. These photos that I've picked, the sand is a little more red. They're not from the areas like Cable Beach. And then the earth is red. It's almost an assault on all of your senses in the best possible way. So I went out there in 2008, and I didn't know what was in Broome, and I went with my sister. And from the second I got there, I went, oh, this place is really special. Because it's harder to get there. There are tourists there, but it's not touristy in terms of it hasn't been built up with high rises and is overrun with tourists in the area. They obviously welcome tourists, and they have an international airport because so many people with money fly in to get their pearls. But it's not this place that is being ruined by tourism. And the camel rides along the beach at sunset, it sounds like it's such a touristy thing to do, and it kind of is, but it's really, really, really magical. And I've done it twice, and I would do it again. I would do it on every trip that I go to. So I went for the first time in 2008. And then when we were shooting The Bachelor in 2013, they said, and girls, get ready, pack your bags. We're going on a trip. We're going to Broome. And all the girls are like, what? And I'm like, oh my God, yes. And so we stayed in the main area of Cable Beach for part of it. But before we got to that part, we went out to a different area called Eco Beach Resort. And it turns out Eco Beach is a 100-acre cattle farm or cattle station. And so you can have a maximum of 100 people there, including staff, all of that. So they've got this accommodation. There's no TVs in the room. You can only get a Wi-Fi signal when you're at the main area. So there's one restaurant, there's the bar that's there, there is a pool. But when you're down on that beach, it's like you're on a deserted island. There is nobody else on that water with you. And I remember getting really grumpy while we were filming, and the producers are like, what do you need? And I said, I need to go swimming in the ocean. And they were keeping us fully made up, mic'd up, and often we weren't shooting. And I was so frustrated. And they're going, what do you need? I said, I need to go in the ocean. You need to give me 1 hour. Just tell me what time we're actually going to shoot. I'll get up early. I'll go for my swim. Then I'll come in and I'll get ready. But you're getting us up at dawn to get ready and mic'd up and sit around and do nothing. And so there was a day where they finally said, right, we're filming interviews, but then we're done for the day. So, and I said, right, let me go first. And they went, okay. So I filmed all my interviews in my bikini so I could go for a swim. And a bunch of us who were done first, we all got together, and we actually have behind the scenes photos of us all on the beach. I was a new woman when I went into that water. So in case, if you've been here for the whole show and you get to this point, there is a theme with the places that clearly feel mystical and spiritual to me. It's always nature. Often it involves ocean, because there is something in that for me. And so then I went back in 2016 before I moved over here, because I was like, I don't know when I'll be able to get back. So, but had my visa not come through, I was going to move there and my dad said, but why? And I said, well, I need a change. I need a change of scenery. Melbourne's not it. there are these opportunities in the US and I have to go and pursue them. But if for whatever reason they don't come through, I'm going there. I don't know what I'm going to do, but that's where I need to be. So that's where I would have ended up.
That's a beautiful place. Amazing. I feel like we should all let's all go. Come on.
I would
How easy
love
is it
to
for
take
an
you
American
there.
to go to Australia? Is it easier to get a citizenship there?
I
Anyway,
don't think so.
oh well.
That sucks.
But I almost put when I was thinking of my spiritual places, one that I wanted to include was just the Pacific Ocean because I couldn't decide a location. But I really feel for me, like, but see, of course you choose what you know the most, right? But or the California coastline, which I just love. It's so dramatic. and
Yes.
you know, people think of California, and I really feel like they're thinking of Florida beaches based on the number of people who come to California and think that they don't have to bring warm clothes, but it gets very cold here at night, and especially on the coast. And it's just amazing when the fog rolls in. But there's something about ocean water it's the salt air. It's a metaphor for so much mysterious about life.
And when it gets stormy over the ocean and the ocean's angry and all of that, there is a magic to that as well. So where Broome is, that's the Indian Ocean that you're a part of. So the Pacific is on the other side, on the east coast of Australia. It is, I don't even know if my description has done it justice. There is a magic there, and there's a very strong Indigenous community there. And I think the Indigenous culture and community is so important to Australia. I'm sure if I had a previous life in Australia, it was in that region. There is just that connection.
I think one of my astrocartography lines goes through that area as well.
I had David look at it, and he said you'd have a very weird life there. So I don't remember what planet it was. I wonder if it was Uranus or something that goes through there. He goes, it'd just be a really strange life. Like California is where you're meant to be. And I went, well, that was where I was going.
Weird life or California?
Right.
Which is also a weird life.
And yet I was just going to say, I feel like I fit into California life because my weirdness in Melbourne was people were a bit taken aback by it. Whereas over here, I'm either the perfect amount of weird or I'm not as weird as the others who exist here. I don't even know. But I was just going to finish up. Sorry, I'm just going to say it because otherwise we're going to keep doing that. I was shocked at how cold it gets here in California. The first trip I did over here in November, it was 2015. And I remember it poured with rain, and I called a friend. I said, what's going on? She goes, oh yeah, it gets cold here. And I went, I had no idea. I'm not prepared for this. And we'd gone out for lunch, and it was this horrible windy day. And I remember going back to the apartment I was in, and I ordered Mexican food, and I just stayed rugged up. And then 2 days before I left, I was on the beach in bikinis. That's California.
Yeah. And the other thing I love about California is you can be weird, right? You can be your weird self. And a lot of people won't pay any attention to you because you're not weird in their circle. There's definitely this, there's a level of society that is just within itself and very insular. And they don't care what you're doing. So that works nicely. But the other wonderful magical body of water that I was going to mention is the Gulf of Mexico. And anytime I've spent there, but I've talked about it on other shows. So people will just have to subscribe to High Vibe TV if they aren't already, and they can go look through old shows to see me talking about that. But the weather definitely has something to do with it too. I think it's otherworldly. So let me see, my number one place, and I've talked about this before as well, but there's nothing like it for me, and I will just put that up, is the Passage Tomb at Newgrange in Ireland. And I will also say that Ireland's a place that didn't visit until 2013, 2014. And it's one of those places that I'd always, I'd always wanted to go, but wasn't super excited about it. And I always thought it's got to be overrated because so many Americans love Ireland because we have so many connections there, and I'm sure the same is with Australians because so many Irish went to Australia, a lot of them against their will, as well. But it's just the minute that I touch down, or the minute you're flying over, it's amazing. It's a different shade of green that you've never seen in your life before. And that you go, oh, that's why they call it the Emerald Isle. I mean, I just felt like an idiot the whole time, just standing there like, this is amazing. And it's the only place that I've been where at nighttime, you were talking about the fairies in the redwood forest, but at nighttime there, I was just like, this place is so magical. Sometimes I just saw a blue light, like a glowing blue, and I was like, am I crazy? What is this? you know, um, it's really just very magical. That's the only word for it. But the Passage Tomb was a completely different experience, that I didn't even know these passage tombs exist. And my cat's here meowing. It's Kai this time, so I'm sorry if you hear him. He's love I guess he loves the Passage Tomb too. But this Passage Tomb, I didn't even know about it, and I just had heard about this really great tour that someone said I should go on, so I went. And I was just amazed. So partly it could have been that I didn't know what to expect. So it's one of those times where I went into it not knowing at all what I was getting ready to encounter. So this Passage Tomb is really interesting because it was built in 3200 BC. So it's older than the pyramids. I'm thinking, what's the other place? There's another ancient place that it's older than. I mean,
Stonehenge.
It's older than Stonehenge, yes, but it's just very ancient. And this one, there are a lot of them that they're built entirely of stone inside, and it's amazing that there's no, what do you call that, like concrete or like connecting things, no grout between the stones. It's just the stone masonry is amazing that they use stones that look like they just take them from the region and stack them in such a way that no water can get in. So there's a dome. You go into this passage, and then there's a dome overhead that's extremely tall. And then a lot of those have collapsed. So there's some that exist where the roof collapsed in. A lot of them are reconstructed. And what's amazing about this one is that even though the outside wall, that white stone, had fallen off over many years. I mean, first of all, it was used for thousands of years. But when the Christians came through and started building abbeys nearby and all of that, they didn't really want a pagan site right next door, and so it was buried over. So Newgrange was under someone's farm field, and then it was rediscovered. My cat just bit me. Anyway, get out of here, cat. It was rediscovered in the 17th century. And so it's just amazing that, could you imagine finding that, like being this farmer and you dig down and you go in, and of course they knew about passage tombs, but it's amazing in there. And you can actually go in on this tour. You get to go into the tomb and walk into the middle of it. And then they recreate the light that comes in, because this one's aligned to the winter solstice, and light comes in through a window at the top, and it goes all to the back and touches the back, and it's an amazing thing. But it's just amazing to be in this ancient place. And as a Californian, I'm sitting there thinking, we could be crushed to death in an earthquake in here. You look up and see all the stones, and then you think, okay, it's lasted thousands of years. There's nothing that's going to happen while I'm in here. But it's like I don't know. I feel like you have to sometimes be transported into different actual places and experience what it feels like to touch the stone and to feel how the air changes and to see the light, all of those things, it shows you, and to know how ancient it is and that we don't even know what it was used for. It's just amazing. So that's why it's my number one place.
That place looks magical. And so I have long said that I'm sure one of my other past lives goes back to Ireland, because there is a pull there for me that I can't describe. I cry when I hear the accent. I cry when I hear Irish music
When
playing.
you hear the Lord of the Dance.
Yeah. But all of that, there is something that gets me. And so when David was looking at the astrocartography, he was like, no, LA is where you need to be. And then I said, what about Ireland? And he looked, and I've got the same planets running through Ireland that I do through LA. So
wow.
it's obviously one of the places that would work for me. I am itching to go and explore.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. And this past summer, my son did a tour there with his class, with his school, and they did concerts. So a couple of the songs that they sang were like Irish, kind of ancient Irish songs. And I felt that, I was just like, I don't want to sit here bawling right now, but that happens to me too. I think, another thing would be if I could think of one example, I think one of the most spiritual types of gatherings for me would be one around music, right? So a concert, or you can see why festivals are often tied to spiritual themes or events as well, because there's something about music as well that just transports you.
I completely agree. A song can put me back to a particular moment in time. It can put me in a mood. It can pull me out of a mood. It can do so much. And I'm always intrigued when things like Irish music affect me in the way that they do, because it shouldn't have that effect, because it's not from anything I've lived in this life. So I'm always fascinated by that. But I think music is so incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So my honourable mention, and we won't stay on this for a long time, but this place is, again, we go back to nature and water, but it's Preikestolen, which is Preacher's Rock in Norway. So if you can see where that man is standing on top of that rock, that is Preacher's Rock. And you climb up there. The hike is about 2 hours up, because there are some really steep parts, but there were older people and little kids that had gotten themselves up there. That drop down to the fjords is a sheer drop. There is no barrier. There is no ledge that you can land on. If you go over, you're in the fjord. And I was there when I was 22, I think, maybe 23. And my husband and my brother-in-law, they went and got some really big rocks that they dropped down, because they wanted to see if you could see the impact. And rocks that were huge, that they had to work really hard to pick up, you could not even see the impact they made on the water. That is how high you were. And you could see ferries down on the fjords, obviously not where they were dropping the rocks, but they looked like little toy cars. It is just one of the most naturally stunning places I've ever been. To look over the edge, I'm sure there are people that walk up to the edge. I could not. I had to lay down on my stomach and just sort of peek my eyes over. But the reason this was such a magical place for me, my brother-in-law's girlfriend at the time, we hadn't really bonded. We didn't understand why. We found out later it was because my mother-in-law was in her ear saying terrible things. And so this woman came in with this preconceived notion of who I was, which is never a fun place to be. But we did this hike together, and it was while we were up the top of Preikestolen that we bonded, and we became the closest friends. And that woman supported me through literally some of the worst moments of my entire life. My mum dying, my marriage breakdown, an abusive relationship, so many things. And it was that place that did it for me. So I've never been anywhere like it before or since. And so I just thought I would throw that out there as an honourable mention. So you get to Preikestolen from a town called Stavanger, which is the third largest town in Norway.
Wow, that is amazing. I've flown over that region of the world.
Where were you flying to?
I think to Ireland.
Okay.
Or is it Ireland or England? I don't remember which flight, but.
And there are some daredevils that go and they hang off the side, or they get photos and they're balancing on a chair, which is balancing on one leg.
That
gives me anxiety.
Stuff, no, that's beyond. That's not spiritual anymore. That's psychotic.
I see those things and it gives me tingles in my toes, and not the good kind of tingles.
No. Yep. Do you want me to go to your, oh, wait a second here.
My dishonourable mention? I feel like this is going to divide people. And so just before you go to it, I just want to say this is a place that so many people talk about as being so spiritual and so many wonderful things. And me not feeling that same vibe does not take away from what any of you think, feel, or what you get when you're there. But for me, I hated this place. I wanted to, and
no.
I'm being so honest with this, and this is why I know it's going to upset people. I went in thinking that I would love it. I honestly believed that I would, and the whole time I was there, I wanted to peel my own skin off. I can't describe it. I was so uncomfortable. It just wasn't my place. But we stick with the nature theme, and it is
dun, 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 dun.
Mount Shasta. Just didn't do it for me.
Aww.
And driving around, I see the beauty that is there, but it just didn't connect with me. And I find it interesting, and I wanted to bring it up only because, not because I wanted to divide anyone, but because I do find that people either love it or hate it. There doesn't seem to be much of an in-between. Although you, Anne, you're kind of in between with this place. You don't really feel anything one way or the other, do you?
I really love it because of the fact that my kids really loved it when we stayed there. We had a really great time with my dad staying there. And I just always thought it was cool, the idea of having a volcano that maybe could erupt one day, right? But you should go to, I wonder if this is something that is about all volcanoes. Have you been to another volcano before in Hawaii?
Yeah, so we did, I've hiked, why am I having a mental block? It's the big one on Oahu. Diamond Head. I've hiked that a million times and I love it. I hate the crowds because we've also established in this show that I don't like being around crowds. But, and I was going to say we did the Cocoa Head Trail, but I'm sure that's not a volcano. But yeah, no, so the volcanic activity doesn't bother me. I think it's just, there are parts of this earth that don't resonate with all of us. And for me, it was Mount Shasta, and I was so disappointed. And yet I was on a trip with my sister. She loved it. My dad and I spoke about it. He said she had such a great time in Mount Shasta. I'm like, I'm so glad she did, because I was miserable. And I didn't want to make it miserable for her, but I was just so uncomfortable. If it had been up to me, I would have left within 24 hours. But
well, you can't love and have spiritual experiences everywhere, right?
Exactly. So I would like to say to everyone that's watching, please list your places below in the comment section for where you loved or where you hated, because I'm always looking for somewhere new to explore. I love hearing other people's thoughts on what worked for them or what didn't and why. So
I saw Bella Luna in the chat mentioned Vienna, Austria. And I don't know if that's a suggestion for where we ought to go, if that is where she lives or what, but I loved Vienna myself. And that's an example of a place that I absolutely loved. And I've talked to other people who will remain nameless who hated it. And
really?
I think it was because, they just saw a different part of the city. But for me, it was an amazing place again, just otherworldly, amazing, an ancient place that is so alive today. I really like that. I really like vibrant places that are, that's what's unique about European cities. For us in America, if there's a old place, we tend to just create a museum out of it, right? But in Europe, they're using the same buildings, the
Yeah,
same,
they live amongst it.
yeah. So
I would love to go to Vienna, and Bella Luna is saying that was for you, and you would love the music. No, I've always wanted to go to Vienna. I want to explore more of Europe. I just, like I said, feeling the history coming out of the buildings and the cobblestones, and you can almost hear some of the conversations and the horses and all that sort of stuff. At least that's how I felt. With that being said, I hated the town of Brussels. I hated it. But again, it was because we were traveling from London to Amsterdam, and we got stuck in Brussels in the middle of the night. There was some issue with the trains, and they went, "We're not going any further. You got to get off." And so a whole group of us got left in Brussels with no accommodation in the middle of the night. And we stayed in probably the worst hotel room I have ever stayed in my life. And so that colors my experience of Brussels. So, and I have friends that have lived there and say that it's one of the most wonderful towns. And I think sometimes it's who we are as to how we resonate with the place. And I think, like you said, it's how the experience that we have and where we end up. And if we end up in the wrong spot, I mean, people come to LA and hate it. And I love this city. I love it, but you have to know where to go.
Right. I mean, it's not that far out of Los Angeles that you could get to Wayfarer's Chapel, right?
Correct.
So you have to know what are the places. And I'm sure that's how everywhere is, because I do find it difficult to find spiritual places within cities. It's kind of hard because there's not a lot of space for thought. I mean, and I think both of us have an element of needing to have an imaginative part of, or, being able to experience whatever we want to experience in these locations,
Yeah.
So,
And I think the distance from people, I think distance from the noise of technology and all of that, I think that plays a big part in having that connection and being able to have that mystical experience.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we need to wrap it up, and I don't know whether we have our next show already planned so we can tell people when it will be.
No, I don't think we do, but it won't be long and we'll be back.
Right. We will be. As soon as we think of another thing and find another person to corral onto our show.
So make sure you're on Facebook and Instagram, The Gemini Rising Show, because that is where we post all the updates for what is coming up. We do have some incredible guests. I was going to say coming up later this month, but we're not in June yet. I need to stop wishing my life away.
Right. No. And meanwhile, everybody can see us on High Vibe TV.
Absolutely.
You're on Full Disclosure. You can catch me on History in the Stars tomorrow and on Wednesdays, and go back and watch the old shows when you subscribe to the app.
Absolutely. The link will be below.
All right. And thanks to everybody for joining us today. And we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.